All right, let's talk about what's happening in Europe's PVC market. And believe me, it's a big deal. The industry is in a really tight spot right now. We're talking about a story of sky-high costs, a tidal wave of cheap imports, and a whole industry caught in this brutal economic vice grip. Some are even saying it's facing an existential crisis. So, to really get a sense of just how urgent this is, you only have to rewind the clock about a decade. Back in 2013, Europe was an absolute powerhouse when it came to PVC exports. I mean, they were shipping out more than 7 times what they were bringing in. Now, fast forward to 2023, and that huge advantage, it's pretty much gone. This isn't some slow, gradual decline, folks. This is a massive, dramatic shift that has completely flipped the script on Europe's long-standing role as a top exporter.
Okay, so the big question is, what's behind this collapse? Well, we're calling it the squeeze. And it's exactly what it sounds like. European producers are getting hammered from 2 directions at the same time. They've got these crippling costs at home, and then this flood of super cheap products coming in from other countries. Let's break that down, starting with the pressure from inside. We're talking about the cost burden. You see, European manufacturers are wrestling with some of the highest energy costs on the planet. And to put that into perspective, for PVC production, just the electricity alone can make up almost half of the entire manufacturing cost. That's huge. It creates this fundamental disadvantage that makes it incredibly tough to compete on the world stage.
And this isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. This is a real-world problem with very real consequences. Just look at Vinnova's plant in Beek. Its shutdown is a perfect and pretty stark example of what happens when these costs just become totally unsustainable. We are literally watching production capacity in the region just disappear. But here's the thing. This isn't the first time Europe has had to deal with a surge of cheap imports. And to get a clue about what might happen this time around, we really need to look at how the EU has handled this exact kind of threat before, and not that long ago either. So let's look at that history. Back in 2020, imports from the US and Egypt started to creep up. But by 2023, they had absolutely exploded. We're talking 8 times the level they were at in 2020. Just a year after that, those 2 countries alone controlled 40% of the entire import market. The EU's response? It was fast and it was decisive. In January 2025, they slammed on massive anti-dumping duties, also known as ADDs. Yeah, right before those tariffs were put in place, shipments from the US and Egypt made up almost half of all PVC imports coming into the EU. It was this incredibly fast market takeover that really pushed the EU to put up those protective walls. And the impact? Wow. It was immediate and it was dramatic. Egyptian imports, which were facing duties of over 100%, just stopped completely. US volumes, they dropped by almost 90%. This really goes to show you how effective these kinds of trade defense tools can be. The threat was spotted, and boom, it was neutralized. But you know how it goes. As one door closes, another one swings right open. With the US and Egypt pretty much out of the picture, a brand new wave of suppliers came rushing in to fill that gap. This time, the challenge is coming from Asia, but the whole pattern? It feels eerily familiar, doesn't it? Just look at the numbers. In the first 9 months of 2025, imports from South Korea tripled compared to the same time in 2024. That's a pretty big jump, for sure. But believe me, it's only the beginning of the story. At the exact same time, shipments from Taiwan shot up by nearly 3.7 times. So again, we're seeing this unbelievably fast acceleration, with these new players just grabbing market share left and right. But the most stunning increase of all, that came from China. We're talking about a jump from just 3,000 tons to about 35,000 tons. That is a 12-fold surge in under a year. Now, okay, the total numbers might still seem kind of small, but it's the sheer speed and scale of that growth that's got everyone in the industry really worried. And this brings us to a really key point. And it was put perfectly by someone inside the market. They said it's not really the volume of the imports that's the main problem, it's their influence on pricing. That's the real disruptive factor here. So here's what's happening. These shipments from Asia are showing up in Europe with a huge discount. We're talking at least €100 a ton cheaper than the stuff made locally. And that kind of price gap, when it's there day after day, is already starting to change who buys from whom, especially down in Southern Europe. So this new wave of cheap imports, it's actually created a huge split right inside the European market itself. The battle lines aren't just between Europe and Asia anymore. Now they're drawn between European companies that are on totally different sides of the supply chain.
So, on one side, you've got the PVC producers, and they're basically screaming for immediate protection to stop the damage, saying, hey, this crazy inflow of cheap stuff has got to be investigated. But then, on the other side, you have the converters. These are the companies that actually buy the PVC to make things like pipes and windows. And they're worried that tariffs will cut them off from affordable materials, and even worse, could tick off their Asian partners and lead to retaliation.
And the producers, they're leaning on precedent. Their point is, look, this isn't about targeting any one country. It's about a principle. The principle being that anytime you see a super fast inflow of cheap imports like this, it should automatically trigger a closer look from regulators. For them, it's a simple case of defending fair trade.
But the converters, well, they're afraid this whole thing could backfire big time. They're arguing that if the EU blocks the raw PVC material, Asia could just switch gears and start shipping over cheap finished goods instead. The actual pipes and window frames. And if that happens, it could flood the market and end up hurting the very same European converters that the policy might be trying to help. It's a classic, messy trade dilemma with absolutely no easy answer.
So all of this, it leaves the European PVC market at a huge crossroads. The pressure is building, the industry itself is split down the middle, and the people making the decisions are facing some really tough choices that will have massive consequences. So the big question is, what happens next?
Well, it looks like there are three main ways this could go. Option one, the EU could just extend the duties they already have on the US and Egypt to include these new Asian suppliers. Option two, they could start a brand new investigation, which would probably take a really, really long time. Or option three, they could use a quicker tool, like an import quota, to just put a hard cap on how much can come in. Of course, each of these paths has its own timeline and its own political headaches.
When you boil it all down, the entire struggle in the PVC market really comes down to one fundamental question. In today's global economy, where do you draw the line between protecting your own industries and accidentally destroying them? As trade flows keep shifting and competition gets more intense, Europe has to figure out how to defend its turf without completely cutting itself off. And finding that perfect balance, well, that's the huge challenge that's going to define the future of not just this market, but probably a whole lot of others too.